Hello, everyone. Good to see you on this snowy day in Toronto. I am Omaira Isa, and I will be your Master of Ceremonies today. It's an incredible pleasure to be here. It's particularly a pleasure to be back at Massey College because I was a journalism fellow here in 2022, 2023. So this feels like home to be back. Great pleasure to be with you as well to talk about this and be part of this important event. Um, the launch of the Resilience Network in support of exiled communities. So I just want to take a moment and ask you to say hello to any person that you may not have said hi to next to you very quickly. Hello, hello. Okay. Nice to meet. Nice to talk to you. I want to salute each and every one of you for I want to salute each and every one of you for this incredible work that you are doing. I think I have opened a Pandora box. So let's gather in together, please. And in this moment, I want to salute you for being here to talk about the resilience of our country, of our communities, the ever important and ever ongoing safeguarding of our democracy, and the full participation of exiled communities in building Canada, in building our society, and with the collaboration of many of you to make this happen. So let me now invite Nurjaheen Mawani. I'd like to introduce her. She is a lawyer, a public servant, and a champion of justice, gender, and inclusive development. As chairperson of Canada's Immigration Refugee Board, she led the recognition of gender-related persecution as a ground for refugee status. As the commissioner of the Public Service Commission of Canada, she was a strong advocate for advancing equity and representation. From 2005 to 2009, she served as the diplomatic representative of the Aga Khan Development Network in Kyrgyzstan and Afghanistan. As the recipient of the Order of Canada and numerous accolades, Mujaheen's contributions span public service, international development, and women's rights. She's a senior here at Massey College, and she mentors junior fellows, connecting them to changemakers in Canada and worldwide. So please welcome Mujaheen as she speaks to us. We do live in Canada, and it is important to do a land acknowledgement. Massey College is built on land where many Indigenous people have lived. It is on the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit Union, of the Credit Nation, as well as the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat and Anishinaabe people. We want to acknowledge our duty of stewardship toward the land and the great privilege that we have to work and live on this land. So without further ado, let me invite Nurjaheen Mawani in this moment.
Thank you so much, Omaira, for your gracious words and introduction. And so good afternoon to everyone. Bonjour à tous et toutes. And we want to welcome Omaira back to Massey College. As you said, you were remembering your days here when she was the journalism fellow here. So we remember her well, and so many others. So it's really gratifying to see you all at this important moment. I'm taking time from your busy schedules and the weather. I mean, I was thinking today that, if you're going to launch the Resilience Network, hey, a perfect day to remind us really of the importance of resilience in multiple ways, right? And when I see the room filling up, it also tells me that you're all so committed and want to learn more about what the resilience network is about. So for that too, thank you very much. I'm going to describe it as a bold and transformative initiative. So, and I want to extend my deep gratitude to our co-hosts, Equitas, Resilient Societies, and Journalists for Human Rights for their steadfast dedication and to empowering human rights defenders and fostering civic engagement. And I want to acknowledge right away the senior fellow Payam Akawan. Payam is not here with us in person, but he will be joining us to offer some remarks from The Hague. I'm going to tell you right away that Payam is actually right now, he's also the chair of human rights at Massey, but he is representing as lead counsel small island states in a climate action before the International Court of Justice. So we thought it was quite appropriate that he be there and important and necessary, but then he's going to join us online. So at that point, I may just add a little bit more about Payam, who doesn't really need much introduction. And I will also then want to turn to now Honorable Ratna Omidwar, and a very special welcome to you. Ratna, if I may say so, because you are, I think we're so fortunate to have you here. I can't think of anybody else who would be, I mean, just so perfect for us to doing the keynote for us. Why? Those of you who haven't had a chance to read or listen to Senator Honorable Omedwar's farewell statement to the Senate, I commend you, all of you, to read that. Because if ever there is a story about a journey in resilience, and I mean, your journey, Ratna, epitomizes that. But more than that, oh, sorry, I know you're supposed to introduce the senator, but if you don't mind, this is just a... No, so forgive the breach in protocol. But I mean, that's the reason immediately that we thought of you, that you would be just the right person to inspire us all and inspire the human rights defenders, the civil society advocates, those who are engaged in ensuring that the pressure that we are seeing on democracies is pushed back. And so you would be the right person. And through that, talk about the resilience network. And we are, I mean, I'm just going to offer a few observations of my own, if I may. This gathering today takes place at a pivotal moment in our history. Civic spaces worldwide are shrinking. Polarization and authoritarianism are on the rise, and the very foundations of democracy are under attack. These challenges demand bold and brave leadership. They call for initiatives that break new ground and offer innovative solutions. The Resilience Network is one such initiative, a beacon of hope and action. It has the potential to transform how exiled communities are supported and empowered globally, enabling them to resist repression and rebuild civic spaces wherever they are. If you allow me to draw a little bit from my own personal experience, because this is why the Resilience Network and Resilient Societies has very special meaning for me. I'm sure it does for many of you, but that was from my time as the Aga Khan's diplomatic representative in Central Asia and in Afghanistan for many years. What it did over those years, it gave me the privilege of engaging directly with so many courageous individuals, striving to nurture nascent democracies. And if I may say, that was the time when I met Maiwan Rayab, 2012. And Maiwan was was very active in civil society, a civil society leader. And we worked together. And probably one thing I'd like to let you know about, which you may not be aware, is that my one was the executive director of the very first Afghan Institute for Civil Society. And that was an initiative of the Aga Khan Development Network and USAID. And I think that was the start when we began to work very closely together. Then he had a very interesting career and ends up here. So just for those of you who I can see several in the room here who I knew from Kabul, and we've talked about it before, that honestly, I did not expect that we would meet here in these circumstances. I thought we would meet here to come and visit as holidays and to do wonderful things together and to continue the work in Afghanistan, and then to find that you had to leave your countries. And I don't think that we think about that enough. But because when you know people and you know what they've had to give up and what they've had to and to be able to force out, and so for their own protection and that of their friends. So your commitment, and I think for me the most important thing is that you've never stopped. You've come here and you are in exile. You are under surveillance, many of you, we know that too, but you have continued your work for freedom and justice. And so your commitment reminds us that the fight for democracy does not end with displacement. It persists, and it calls for our support and engagement, particularly at a time when policies in many countries in the global north are becoming increasingly exclusionary. In this context, it is critical that we acknowledge the contribution of exiled communities. The question for us is, what are we doing about their presence and their contribution? I believe it's very important to see exiled activists as part of a concentric circle that dovetails Canada's core components of its foreign policy that has long championed human rights and democratic governance. We need to transform our orientation towards seeing exiled human rights defenders as the powerful actors for democratic change, that they are here and that in their countries of origin. Canada is enriched by the presence of exiled activists who bring with them courage, expertise, and new perspectives. Their contribution strengthens our democracy and civic space, reflecting our values of diversity and pluralism. Their work, indeed your work, and struggles also hold up a mirror to our own society in Canada. And they serve as a powerful reminder that democracy is a process to be continually nurtured and safeguarded with vigilance. Perhaps more importantly, this mirror and exchange in knowledge and experience speaks profoundly to the fundamental role of reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. Indeed, there are many bridges which need to be built to make our tapestry as a country stronger. So in this context, we've seen how powerful the role of art is. And if I may, today I'm very moved, as you will be, by the presence of art lords here today. And thank you very much to Yama and to Arif for bringing your amazing artworks here. And I want to give a little shout out to the Aga Khan Museum for including these amazing art pieces and more in the Afghanistan My Love exhibit. Thank you, Ulrike, and now thank you to you, Chris, as well. And all I'd like to add here is that I was in Kabul when what you did through Art Lords, you transformed the streets of Kabul. You transformed the streets of Kabul into canvases of beauty, canvases of resistance, and canvases of hope. And I know personally the risks you took and other artists took to speaking truth to power through your art. In exile, your art continues to do so and reminds us of the vital role creative expression plays in confronting repression and building solidarity across borders. Your work embodies the resilience and determination that this resilience network, which we are about to launch and launching today, seeks to champion. So I'm ending now with a call to action, if I may. The launch of the Resilience Network is a call to action for all of us. It is a moment to turn solidarity into tangible support, to build resilience, and to amplify the voices of those who refuse to be silenced. I urge each one of you, whether policymakers, civil society leaders, or individuals, to join in supporting this bold initiative. And I know we look forward to hearing more about this from the Honorable Ratna Omidwar. Thank you so much for being part of this journey. Together, we can ensure that the voices of the courageous resonate across borders and generations as they continue to inspire change and bring hope. With that, if I may, I would like to introduce Payam Akwan. And Payam is joining us online. Oh, there he is. Welcome, Payam. I don't know if you were listening in while I was talking, introducing you through your work as lead counsel for representing small island nations in the International Court.
Yes, I was, Noor Jahan, and thank you for embarrassing me, as you always do.
So, I mean, I would say that Payam Akawan, professor, doesn't really need much introduction. I think he's really a global figure in human rights. But I will say a couple of words. It's a distinguished professor of international law and inaugural chair in human rights at Massey College, University of Toronto. Is a member of the Permanent Court of Arbitration and special advisor on genocide to the International Criminal Court. Previously a full professor at McGill University, he has held academic positions at prestigious institutions including Yale, Oxford, Sciences Po, and a leading scholar on human rights and international criminal law. He has published and extensively delivered number of, and the CBC Massey lectures. Akawan was the first legal advisor to the International Criminal Court for the former Yugoslavia and has worked with the UN investigating atrocities worldwide. He's defended genocide survivors, including the Baha'is, the Yazidis, and the Rohingya, and has argued landmark cases before international courts. Co-founder of the Iran Human Rights Documentation Center, Payam Akawan received the 2021 Human Rights Award from the Law Society of Ontario. I give you Payam Akawan.
Thank you very much, Noor Jahan, for that very kind introduction. Merci beaucoup. Bonjour, bienvenue au Collège Massey. I'm very sorry I cannot be there with you in person, but a warm welcome on behalf of the Human Rights Chair at Massey College to this very important event. And I would begin by paying a tribute as well to dear friend, a distinguished colleague, Ratna Omidwar, and to thank her for her years of selfless sacrificial service and what a great keynote speaker you have to exemplify the sense of empathy, engagement, and resilience that is the theme of this conference. When we speak about exile, I think that exile is in effect a longing to belong. It is an emotional space that we confuse with a physical place. And while none of us obviously choose to experience grief, pain, and we have these primal wounds that seemingly never heal, exile, suffering, injustice is also an opportunity for us to discover the astonishing light of the human spirit. It reminds me of the poem of Hafez from Shiraz, who some thousand years ago said, "I wish I could show you in your darkness the astonishing light of your own being." In the more than 35 years where I've worked with survivors of genocide and other injustices across the world, I have seen immeasurable sorrow and grief, but I've also understood the astonishing resilience of the human spirit. So, in a sense, the pain and the grief is also mixed with the joy and the compassion, which we only understand not in moments of ease and comfort in our first world bubbles, but when we go to these sites of sorrow, we see people who've lost everything, but who refuse to give up, who fight against overwhelming odds, and in doing so, tell us what it means to be a human being. I'm here in The Hague at the International Court of Justice, as my dear colleague Nurjahan explained, representing Bangladesh, as well as a number of small island states who are fighting for climate justice, one of the greatest challenges to human rights, which will become increasingly apparent to us in the coming years as the catastrophic consequences of burning fossil fuels of inaction becomes clear. And it is an issue of justice because it is a handful of countries that are contributing to greenhouse gas emissions more than anyone else, but the consequences are being felt by the poor and the vulnerable. On Monday, the ambassador of Bangladesh stood up before the World Court, the highest court of the United Nations, and said that by the year 2050, Bangladesh will have 20 million climate migrants, 20 million, and that every day 2,000 climate migrants are leaving the Bengal Delta because of rising sea levels, salination of fresh water, and populating the already overpopulated capital city of Dhaka. On Friday of next week, I will be representing small island states, including Tuvalu, population of 11,000 indigenous Pacific islanders, whose country will, in the foreseeable future, become uninhabitable. It will literally disappear under the waves. So when you look at the injustice of the world, you begin to think, how is it possible to achieve justice against this immensity of suffering? And tomorrow I will be together with a group of women from Afghanistan meeting with the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court to encourage him on behalf of a group of outstanding Afghan women to begin an investigation in respect of gender persecution. And of course, the Hague bubble is a world away from all of the stories that I've just shared with you from the front lines, in the trenches where people are suffering, and they look to these international institutions for justice. And it's very humbling to realize how little one can actually do to help people, but why it is still important, even against overwhelming odds, to do what we can. I will end perhaps by sharing with you, given my Iranian heritage, poetry, which is our refuge of choice. And I think that just before the Honorable Ratna Omidvar takes the floor to deliver the keynote, I really dedicate this great poem of Saadi to her and her example. And really, it is a poem that some 1,000 years later still resonates deeply with what it means to be a human being and the theme that we're discussing. And Saadi says, human beings are members of a whole, created in essence of one essence and soul. If one member is afflicted with pain, other members uneasy will remain. If you have no sympathy for human pain, the name of human you cannot retain. So, in our resilience, in our empathy, we um, understand what it means to be a human being. So, I would really, in a sense, congratulate all of you who are still standing, who are still fighting, because you are simply discovering and expressing what really makes us human beings. Thank you once again for this opportunity to address you, and I'm very, very sorry I cannot be there with you in person. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Payam. I take into note that, as you said, exile is a longing to belong. I'd like now to introduce Honorable Senator Ratna Omidvar. She's not to be introduced. We all know her, but I will do this because it's important. Honorable Ratna Omidvar is an internationally recognized voice on immigration, migration, diversity, and inclusion. Appointed to the Senate of Canada in 2016, she has been a leading advocate for immigrant integration and social cohesion. Honorable Omidvar is a director of the Samara Center for Democracy, a counselor on the World Refugee and Migration Council, a founding committee member of Lifeline Afghanistan, and chair emerita of the Toronto Region Immigrant Employment Council. Previously, she was a distinguished visiting professor at Ryerson University and founded the Global Diversity Exchange. She became a member of the Order of Canada in 2011. She is, since her retirement from the Senate of Canada, she serves as a public policy fellow at the School of Public Policy and Democratic Innovation at Toronto Metropolitan University. I give you Senator Ratna Omidvar.
Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to talk to you today. If I had known I was following Dr. Akhavan, I would have thought twice about agreeing, because truly he's not only a great human rights lawyer, he's a philosopher, he's a poet. And perhaps it's the Iranian connection, I am very susceptible to beautiful poetry, especially when it comes from Hafez and Sadi. So I'm standing before you as I think a bit of I've always felt, and maybe it's women, we feel we are imposters, that we don't really deserve the credit or the validation. But I'm going to leave that aside and go back to what I wanted to say to you. I know that many of you, like me, have come to this country unwillingly, come to this country because there was no other choice. And I think, even though I don't know you that well, that we probably share a great deal of commonality with each other. And if there was a novelist in the room, he or she would sketch out a novel. It would have 4 chapters. We would all have a starring role in these same 4 chapters. Chapter 1 would be rejection. Chapter 2 is arrival. Chapter 3 is resilience. And finally, hopefully, with resilience comes redemption. I'm going to tell you a few personal stories and try and weave them into the theme of today's conference, which is the calling into life of the Resiliency Network. And I think resiliency is a core human capacity. We get lazy about it if we live comfortable lives. And I think those of us who've sought discomfort, who've been forced to live uncomfortable lives, find their own way to untapped sources of resiliency. I am, of course, eternally grateful to this country for giving me and my family sanctuary, safety, and security. But I'm also very clear, and Maiwan and I talked about it, the beginning is really hard. And even after, I came to Canada in 1981, so I'm going to tell you stories from way back, which will help you reflect on whether we have come much further or whether we have not come far enough. So when I arrived in Canada in 1981 with a partner and a little daughter, we were very anxious, like all of us who come here, to quickly learn the ropes and start our new lives. And we realized very quickly that there were the written rules that everyone would tell you about. Written rules, 1981, you needed Canadian work experience. It was a written rule. But there were many unwritten rules, and no one was actually willing to explain the unwritten rules, the code of conduct, the norms here. And I'll give you one example to make it come real to you. This whole idea of privacy, for instance. I come from India, which is a very big, very crowded, very noisy country. And I come from a culture where curiosity about someone else is in our DNA. It is part of who we are. And it is not at all strange when you meet someone for the first time to ask them, where do you live? Who are your parents? Which school you went to? Who's your boss? What kind of car do you drive? And most importantly, how much money do you earn? We were shut down pretty quickly. Yep. And now when I go back to India, people ask me, how much money do you earn? And I, of course, have become Canadian enough to say, not enough. But I did make two really important decisions, right? And I think in the first month of arrival. And I'm retelling the story because I've told it often, and I apologize to those who've heard it before. But these two decisions I made go to the heart of why I am here before you. When we arrived really early in the first week, I was advised by someone who had a very proud Indian name, Ashok. Ashok is a very proud Indian name, and he called himself Ash instead. And I asked him why, and he said, this is the Canadian way. And he advised me that your first name, last name, India, Iran is too complicated, too many vowels, too many syllables. Change it, make it tight, make it simple. You'll get a job, people will remember you, you'll move on. And I was like, okay, maybe I have to do this. And we actually thought about this. And in the home, we threw around a couple of names just to try them on for size. And the first name was, of course, Rita. Nah. Then the second name was Rosa. And then I think I got to my senses and I said, no, I'm not going to change my name. I can't change my name. I can't change the color of my skin. I'm proud of both, and I will wear them proudly. But I did decide to change something about myself because I think resiliency requires both a value base and the ability to change and adapt. And I am, by some strange accident, and I won't go into the story, I am a teacher of German. Now, I sort of started to look for work in that field, and I realized pretty quickly that no one in their right mind in Canada would want to learn about Germany or German from someone who had come from Iran, born in India, come from Iran as a refugee. So I gave that up, and I decided to reinvent myself. Like many of us have to reinvent ourselves. It is these two decisions I made, one to remain authentic and the other to reinvent myself, that I believe are the core of my being. And when I think of resilience, I think these are the expressions of resilience. And of course, the question is, how do you turn a personal human quality into a quality in civil space? But before I get there, I want to share with you a few of my reflections in this country after being a legislator for 8 years. But I have been an outsider before I became an insider. And I believe that inside-outside lens gives you a healthy perspective on where the country is at. And I think of ourselves, and I know there's a big dose of pessimism out there in Canada about our future. And I believe this pessimism is real. And I also believe we have an antidote to it, because as a country like no other that I know, we are brave enough to look at ourselves in the mirror, warts and all, and recognize that we have done wrong in our past, and we don't succeed as often as we should, but we try to set things right. And it is this capacity, I believe, to, this our search for truth, justice, and reconciliation are a core of who we are. And then when you combine it with the inherent question about who or what is Canada, and my response to that is, it's always evolving. It will always change. It will never be perfect. It will always be in search of perfection. These two qualities, the search for justice, truth, and reconciliation, along with our evolving identity, I believe are a national expression of resiliency. So my Canada is a resilient Canada. It is a country of aspiration, self-reflection, and self-correction. And my Canada is not afraid of an evolving identity. And yet I think, because I spoke about the strain of pessimism, I also believe that Canada is showing signs of strain. Its doors are a little less open. Its fears are becoming greater. Its conversation, too, is becoming polarized and uncivil. Just watch question period in the House of Commons to see incivility at play. It's losing, I think, its measure of optimism. Democracy, the great calling card of the world, and Canada and the United States in particular, is under threat of being torqued, not by undemocratic means, but by completely democratic means. I think this is the danger that we see. Polarization is a clear and present danger. And whilst in the past, we used to argue out our differences and resolve them in a civil manner, this seems to have gone out of fashion. I was at a meeting, at a gathering of thought leaders in Berlin in October, around the theme of rising right-wing authoritarianism and polarization. And I came away with words of wisdom from two outstanding leaders. One is the world-famous Etche Temulkaran, who wrote How to Lose a Country, based primarily on her observations about Turkey, but also elsewhere. And she says, as a warning to the world, that populism and nationalism don't march fully formed into government. They come by stealth. They come by creep. They are upon you without you knowing it is there. The other was a renowned grassroots activist from India called Harsh Mandar, who's often been thrown into jail by the authorities. And we asked them both how one could reverse this trend of right-wing authoritarianism. And I thought we would get two very different answers. One, of course, is a leading intellectual, and the other is a grassroots activist, but they both gave exactly the same answer, which I will share with you. And they said, what we need is radical, unconditional love. Love for human beings, love for the victims of oppression, and love for actions that protect the basic human rights of people, but also love for people who we may disagree with. So what do I make about this radical love? I've tried to reflect on it, and I can share with you that in my own way, I've expressed legislative love in the work I have done in the Senate. I've called the attention of Parliament to the contributions of democracy fighters like Vladimir Kara-Murza, Masa Amini, and Raif Badawi. I successfully led a motion in Parliament calling for the naming of the entirety of the IRGC in Iran as a terrorist organization. I worked with outstanding Afghan women who were judges, lawyers, ministers, and journalists who are organizing to help their sisters in Afghanistan. And I took on the very difficult expression in our law, in the anti-terrorism code, that prevents humanitarian aid from being provided to Afghanistan because Afghanistan is governed by a Canadian listed terrorist entity. These are the niceties, the fine points of legislation that get in the way. So I'm a naturally optimistic person. I look for hope, for points of light, and having lived the thin air of politics for 8 years, I think we need to go back to the grassroots of optimism. And that optimism, in many ways, is found in this room today, because we're coming together to create a new public space, a new civil society space, so that human rights defenders, with their experience in democracy building, in truth telling, in the defense of human rights, they can continue to find legs in their new home for their work and infect us with their own hope and courage. And the launch of this network under the leadership of Maiwand, I think, comes at a really important time, because we too in Canada need to take some hope from the lives of others that are outside our context and build on those. What I like about the Resiliency Network is it's not an institution. It is not an elite NGO. There are many NGOs in the world, in this room today, and I think we know how elite NGOs are sometimes part of the problem instead of part of the solution. And I have some expectations of this network, and if you will forgive me, I will share them with you, because I bear the scars of governance. I have been in this business for 40 plus years, and so I'm going to give you unsolicited words of advice. First, I hope that your network remains authentic and dedicated to your values and mission. It is extremely easy to deviate from the path that you wanted to go on, because there are partnership traps, there are funding traps, there are ego traps that lie in the way. Second, I hope that you will not get derailed from the excellent work you want to do by institutional processes where most of the time, energy, resources are spent in arguing about the institution, its power, who has its power and who does not, instead of focusing on the work. In recent years, I have focused on creating networks and initiatives as opposed to creating organizations, because the burden of caring for an organization often outstrips the capacity to do the work that you set out on. Third, I hope, and this is important, that you will continue to be led by authenticity. There is an increasing trend, especially in the NGO sector, of perceived professionalization, which leads to, new language for me, snow capping, where the grassroots of an organization are from the people, but the leadership is not. This has been borne out by research, and I think it's an important lesson for you to take. Fourth, I hope that those around us who support your network will do so not just in showing up, that's important, but in providing internships to your members, funding and grants, and allyship in its real way. And finally, I hope that Canada will reaffirm its role in the global space as a champion for justice, for equity, for pluralism. And it can do no better than by taking its lead from the Resiliency Network, who are human rights defenders, who use their newfound freedom to raise their voices. We, in turn, can do no better, colleagues, than listening to them, allowing them to lead themselves and following their direction. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Senator, for an incredible keynote. I took in note how you talked about grassroots of optimism. Thank you for that. And as we think about resilience, it is now time for me to introduce Maiwand Rayab. He's the founder and CEO of Resilient Societies, which is an emerging global institution for enhancing the agency, voice, and relevance of democracy and civil society activists and human rights defenders from repressive civic spaces. Before moving to Canada in 2022, he served as the resident country director for the National Democratic Institute in Kyrgyzstan. Maiwan was the inaugural executive director of the Afghan Institute for Civil Society. I give you Maiwan Rayad.
Thank you very much. And thank you so much, Mrs. Nurjan Mawani, Honorable Ratna Midwar, Dr. Payam Mahawan, for sharing your experiences, wisdom, and Ratna particularly for your advice. I've noted all the 4 points that you mentioned. I'll make sure that we look at those every day as we continue working on the Resilience Network. Thank you so much. Before I start I'll have a presentation. I don't have the insights and the wisdom that Nurjahan, Ratna, and Dr. Payam shared, so I'll try to share a few slides about the Resilience Network. But before that, I think I'd like to share my gratitude and thank to our partners, Massey College for hosting us today, Equitas and Journalists for Human Rights for being a partner in hosting today's event, but more generally in creating the Resilience Network. It's been a journey of at least 1 year that we have worked together to reach to this point today. So thank you. I want to also acknowledge the presence of our 3 members of our inaugural board of directors. Chris Eaton, whom you will hear from very soon. We have Moise Bewania and Katie Corker, who are in the room today here, and they are the inaugural members of our board of directors. And I'm really pleased and privileged to seek their guidance, counsel, and support as we move forward with our, I would say, relatively ambitious mandate. I also would like to thank Artlot for being today with their beautiful work of art. And it, as Nurjahan said, it brought me as well so much fond memories of our time in Kabul when Artlot was just being established. I also want to thank our Cooperation Canada and its CEO, Kate Higgins, who's not here today. But when I arrived in Canada, when I talked to Kate about establishing resilient societies, she didn't think twice. She didn't take even 1 day to think about it. She said, yes, we are happy to help you, incubate you, support you. So thank you, Cooperation Canada, for being a partner and supporter of resilient societies from the very beginning. And thank you to all the activists, HRDs, journalists in exile in Canada, but also around the world who has been part of our journey so far. So now I'm gonna have the slides on. So just a bit about Resilient Societies, which is the umbrella organization for Resilience Network. Our journey starts, of course, from Afghanistan. We are rooted in Afghanistan's civil society movements. And then when I was forced to leave my country and went to Turkey and then in Georgia before arriving in Canada, that's where the idea of Resilient Societies as a activist, human rights defenders-led organization was born. And then we were formally launched in Canada last year in the same this week. So it's our first anniversary as well that we are launching our first flagship initiative. Our vision is to a world where every citizen is able to express their views, their opinions without fear of repression and oppression. Our mission is to empower civil society activists, human rights defenders, democracy advocates, journalists to protect and promote civic space globally. We have 3 strategic objectives. Number 1 is about fostering resilience, relevance, and agency of democracy activists and civil society practitioners and activists. What we have seen is, despite a recognition of the importance of listening and engaging civil society activists, still the world has a lot to do to make sure that there's a genuine contribution and representation of activists and HRDs who are in the front lines of fighting for democracy and human rights, so that they have a seat on the table when it's about decision making. We need to strengthen support and solidarity for this group of people. And lastly, we'd like to empower and enable activists and HRDs who are in exile, but also those who are fighting in the front lines for democracy to collaborate, unite, and join their forces in support of democracy and civic space. And by building resilience, agency, and power of democracy activists and civil society practitioners and organizations, we would like to contribute to reversing the unfortunate backsliding of democracy and shrinking of civic spaces. So we have defined for ourselves 3 flagship initiatives. Number 1 is the Global Civic Space Summit, which we plan to host the first one, the inaugural Civic Space Summit, in the early months of next year, in the lead up to the G7 summit in June. We'd like to bring stakeholders from around the world to come to Canada, and then for this to become an annual summit, so that Canada hosts a global summit on civic space every year in Canada. Our second flagship initiative is about creating a resilience hub to counter the digital repression of civic space, which we plan to work on that in 2026. Our third flagship initiative, which we are launching today, is the Resilience Network, which I will talk about more. So the Resilience Network, why we're launching it? A few things. We are seeing, unfortunately, that, as you all know, and Nur Jahan and also Honorable Umedwar talked about, we are seeing the world is experiencing the rise of authoritarianism, the global repression of civic space, democracy is backsliding. As a result, more and more people, unfortunately, journalists, activists, human rights defenders, democracy advocates, are pushed into exile as a way for safety, but also as a coping mechanism. And in exile, unfortunately, based on our research, we are seeing that there isn't an enabling, supportive environment for them to continue their activism, continue their fight for democracy, for rights, for their countries of origin, but also in the countries that they've adapted, in the host countries, to contribute to the promotion of civic space and democracy. That space is not there. So that's why we, after research which we conducted, thanks to, I'd like to also acknowledge IDRC, the International Development and Research Organization, that provided us with support and funding earlier this year, where we conducted a research. And the key finding of that research was that there's a need for systematic, long-term support to help exiled communities to reorganize their lives and also their work. And that's why today we are launching this network. So in Canada, based on our research, these are the key findings that we found in our research. There is a need for more support system in Canada. Access to mental health for exiled activists is a major concern. Transnational repression is been around for many decades, but it's because of technology, because of the that autocracies are more emboldened now. We are seeing more incidents of transnational repression, including in Canada. We are seeing that there's a need for capacity building for activists, protection is a major issue. They're still, even in Canada, they're vulnerable in many ways, and helping them with their advocacy work and upward social mobility. The network will have three main, I would say, services, or will provide three main services. At the center of the network is going to be providing placements. What will happen is that we're going to match exiled activists and HRDs and journalists with host institutions, Canadian host institutions. They can be think tanks, universities, nonprofit organizations, civil society, media outlets who need the expertise. So we'd like to match the activists with the host institutions so that there's support for activists, but also there is a meaningful contribution to the work of the host institutions. The second service area is about helping these groups to continue their advocacy work. We would like to build their capacity, bring activists from different countries together to build coalitions, networks, support, so that they can continue the fight and the causes that they plan to work on. And thirdly, the third service area is capacity building. We will work with our partners, particularly Equitas, which has a long history of providing human rights education and training for human rights defenders around the world, to build a capacity building package, both for the activists who are in exile and HRDs and journalists, but also for the host institution that will host them, so that they are empowered and able to have to be able to create the enabling supportive environment for these fellows or activists. Our stakeholders are going to be, I think, host institutions, the host government, in our case, Canada. But I want to mention that the network is a global network. We are launching it in Canada. It will be housed in Canada. It's Canada grown, but eventually we're going to expand it to US, Europe, and other countries. So we'll have multiple countries as part of the network, and each country will have its own chapter, its own governing bodies and process. So, well, media organization can play a big role in not only in hosting activists and journalists, but also in raising awareness about the contribution of these people, not only to their own countries, but also to Canada's civic and democracy space. Multilateral institutions, including the UN, private sector, we would like to engage the private sectors, foundations in their work, so that there's a whole of society approach to empowering this small group, but powerful and mighty group. And finally, the activists and HRDs themselves. So in terms of the roles of different stakeholders, our role as Resilient Society will be to play the role of secretariat. We'll, identify the activists, go through the screening process, and then refer them, capacity building and all of that, and refer them to host institution that matches their needs and expertise. And then host institutions provide placements, mentoring and training, helps with fundraising and visibility. And then we have institutional partners like Equitas for now and Journalists for Human Rights. And we hope to have more partners in the future to help us in strengthening and building and expanding the work of the network. It's just the beginning. It's a very ambitious program, and it's going to be a long journey. And the more partners we have on board, the more we will be able to succeed in our mission. In terms of milestones, so we worked in the past few months, we worked on establishing the systems, the processes for the network, which we are launching today. We have the launch in December 2024 on our first anniversary, and in the days leading up to the Human Rights Day. And next year, we're hoping to also work on the global expansion while strengthening the network as well. And then lastly, we will work on resource mobilization in the coming weeks, months, and years. We look at community foundations, private philanthropy, Government of Canada, and international human rights and civil society organizations to join us in our journey to support and protect exiled communities of human rights defenders, democracy advocates, and journalists, and to protect and promote civic space in Canada and globally. Thank you so much for being part of our journey so far, and I look forward to working with all of you, including all of you in this room, as we launch in this network, and continue with our work. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Maiwan, for this holistic overview of the network. We will soon go into a panel, but before that, we have a few minutes, 5 top, for a break. Stretching.
Bill Killorn.
Hi, everyone. I hope you had a very good break and were able to talk to new friends and old friends. Now is the time for an incredible panel, and it will be moderated by Rachel Pulfer. And I would like to introduce Rachel Pulfer to you. Rachel Pulfer is the president of Journalists for Human Rights, a print journalist for 2 decades standing. She has 14 years experience in co-creating, piloting, implementing, scaling, and evaluating human rights and media development programs in Africa and the Middle East, as well as working on Indigenous rights in Canada. Under her leadership, JHR has expanded to 4 continents and won several regional and national awards. It's particularly important to note that these include the PEN Canada Marie-Ange Garrigue Prize in 2024, the Missioner Baxter Award for Exceptional Service to Canadian Journalism from the Missioner Foundation in 2022, the Bill Hutton Award for Excellence in Journalism from RTDNA in 2018, and Ontario Heritage and Innovation Awards for Indigenous Reporters Program. I give you Rachel Pulfer and the panel.
Thank you so much, Amira, for that kind introduction. It always sounds like somebody I don't know. So I'm hearing the senator on the imposter syndrome, but it is my great privilege to introduce the members of this incredible panel. And I will do so starting with Sadia, because she asked me not to. Sadia Zaman is a significant individual who is working hard on behalf of democracy, human rights, and journalism in Canada. Currently in her role as a CEO of Inspirit Foundation, she has held many other leadership roles across nonprofits and journalism in Canada. And I'm really looking forward to hearing her insights on this particular topic. Thank you, Sadia, for being here. It is also my privilege to introduce Sheng Zhu. She is a multi-award winning poet, so we'll hear some poetry, I hope, writer, journalist, commentator, and an expert on China issues, as well as a leading voice in the fight against CCP tyranny for global democracy. Also my great privilege to introduce Mostafa Al-Assar. Mostafa comes to us originally from Egypt, where he is an award-winning journalist with over 15 years of experience. He has unfortunately endured 4 years in prison in Egypt for his work, and we will be hearing a little bit more about that. And is currently a CJFE Massey College Journalism Fellow. He is in good company on this panel because Sadia is also a former journalism fellow, as am I. Last but by no means least is Chris Eaton, who Maiwand introduced me to earlier as his new boss. Chris is the interim chair of the Resilient Societies and is currently working in leadership role with the Aga Khan Museum, but has also held important leadership roles with World University Services of Canada and with the Aga Khan Foundation Canada. So this is your panel, so get ready to hear some amazing insights. And I'm starting with Mostafa. You were a journalist for over 10 years, and you were subsequently imprisoned for your work. Can you tell us a little bit about what issues you reported on, why you chose to report on those stories, and what was it like working in Egypt in this way?
Yeah, thank you for the introduction, and I'm very glad to be here and to be a part of Resilience Network Lunch. I feel a bit nervous, but I'm glad to see familiar faces with the audience. To answer your question, I will use my paper. There are times when I feel exhausted and hesitant to retell my story. Each time I introduce myself, I start saying, my name is Mustafa Al-Asar. I am an Egyptian journalist and human rights defender living in exile due to political persecution, having spent nearly 4 years in political prison because of my work as a journalist. When I mention my detention, the focus often shifts entirely to my detention, while my identity as a journalist is overshadowed. As though my identity as a journalist is defined solely by my imprisonment, which frustrates me deeply. In fact, I sometimes avoid mentioning my detention. I didn't become a journalist because I was imprisoned. I was imprisoned because I was a real journalist. Before my imprisonment, I had built a strong reputation in journalism, and I have continued this work afterwards. Nothing has changed. At the same time, I feel like a responsibility to share my story, as it presents not only or not just my story, but tens of thousands of prisoners of conscience in Egypt. From my position in exile, I feel a moral obligation to amplify the voices of the voiceless. There is a beautiful verse in the Quran says in Arabic, لا يحب الله الجهر بالسوء من القول إلا من ظلم. I tried to find accurate translation in English, but it's not the exact meaning. This verse says, Allah doesn't like negative thoughts to be voiced except by those who have been wronged. The other translation says, Allah doesn't like to speak out about evil except those who have been wronged. I have been wronged, and I will continue to speak out and raise my voice against it until Egypt's oppressive regime is dismantled. And before answering your question, I want to highlight an example of resilience. Dr. Laila Swift, one of the bravest and most inspiring individuals I've ever met, today marks her 66th day on a hunger strike and day 26 of our consecutive one-day hunger strike in solidarity with her. I have started my 24-hour strike yesterday, which will end in a couple of hours. Dr. Laila Swift is a 68 years old, protesting the ongoing imprisonment of her son, Ala Abdel Fattah, who remains detained despite completing his 5 years sentence. Ala Abdel Fattah is a British Egyptian and political activist who was sentenced to 5 years in prison for retweeting a post on Twitter. He wasn't even the original author. 5 years in prison for retweeting. You might ask why didn't they arrest the original author? Because he's an exiled journalist, simply. And even after Ala serving his unjust sentence, the Egyptian regime has kept him behind bars in solidarity with Dr. Laila Swift and Ala Abdel Fattah. Freedom for Ala Abdel Fattah, freedom for all prisoners of conscience in Egypt. And this is just one example of how it looks in Egypt and for resilience. And also I have some pictures for Dr. Laila with her son Ala Abdel Fattah in Egypt, and another photo for Dr. Laila demanding the Ala freedom for Ala, and last one, it's me after my release, celebrating my release in their house in Egypt. Dr. Laila and Mona, her daughter. Returning to the main point, in Egypt, journalism is often called the profession of seeking trouble. I don't know if it's the same in Canada.
Yes, it is. Or it should be.
Yeah. Being a journalist in Egypt requires choosing one of two paths: aligning with the regime to secure personal safety and professional stability, or working as an independent journalist guided by conscience, which comes with significant personal and professional and financial risks. I choose the hard way. As a high school student, my family, I don't know how to pronounce this word, opposite or opposed. Yes,
Opposed.
my family opposed my desire to study journalism, insisting I pursue engineering. They feared the trouble journalism might bring. They forced me to study math and physics to ensure I wouldn't qualify to any of the engineering schools. I intentionally failed physics, scoring just
Bravo.
scoring just 8 out of 50, and my father still doesn't know this information. I hope.
Hopefully he's not online.
Yes, I hope he is not watching right now. He don't speak English, but I'm pretty sure he will understand what I'm saying. So after much struggle, I managed to study journalism. I used to work as an independent journalist covering human rights issues, Egyptian affairs, and Middle East affairs, especially after the Arab Spring Revolution, as one of the participants and believers in the Egyptian Revolution 2011. In early 2018, I worked on a documentary about democratic transition in Egypt during the presidential election. State security had illegally tapped my phone and recorded my conversation with the documentary guests, political science professors, politicians, and party leaders. Most of them has been arrested afterwards. A day before filming began, security forces kidnapped me from street with gun pointed to my head. They blindfolded and handcuffed me and forcibly disappeared me for 16 days in an underground cell at unknown place. During those 16 days, I stayed 24/7 blindfolded and handcuffed. I subjected to physical, psychological torture, threats, and prolonged interrogations. When I was finally presented before the state security prosecution, I was charged with joining a terrorist group and spread false news. I spent over 2 years in pretrial detention, exceeding the legal maximum of 2 years. In May 2020, the public prosecutor ordered my release, but instead, security forces kidnapped me again from a police station and forcibly disappeared me again. I reappeared facing a new case with nearly the same charges. Ironically, this case was dated in 2019 when I was already in prison. After another year and few months in detention, I was released in July 2021. And following my release, I stayed in Egypt for 1 more year and a few months. I tried to heal and continue my work, but I never felt safe. With 2 open cases under investigations, I could have been arrested at any moment. Facing direct threats, I fled to Lebanon with a suitcase, $2,000, a 3-month tourist visa with no clear plan, and a completely foggy future. For 18 months, I lived in Lebanon without legal protection or residency paper, forced to leave and re-enter every 3 months to renew my visa. This year, I relocated finally to Canada. And despite everything, I will not remain silent about what's happening in Egypt. And I hope that answers your question. Yeah. Thank you.
Very much. Very inspiring, Mustafa. Thank you so much for sharing your story. And we'll be coming back to you shortly with more questions. But right now I'm looking at you, Sheng. And if you could please share with us, based on your personal experience, what sort of support do exiled civil society activists want and need from places where civic space and democracy are under threat, and why?
As an exiled activist and a human rights defender in Canada from China, sometimes I feel funny. I became Canadian since 1993. So Canada is my country. Canada is my home for 30 years. And today marks the 35 years, 3 months, 14 days since I arrived here. You may ask, why are you counting your date? No, I don't need to count because I have never been able to go back to my home country, to my hometown. So it's automatically appear to my mind every day. And I started my activities 20 days after I arrived here. And I tried my very best and also to support Tibetans, Uyghurs, Hong Kongers, and Taiwanese, and people from North Korea and from Vietnam, whoever, wherever they come from, the tyrannies that I think we are, we are in the same line, the same camp. But still, when I was turned back from high school in Ontario as a human rights teacher to accompany the students. So they said that because the students' parents, they don't want me to talk about human rights to their children from China here in Canada. And then I was turned back by UBC as a writer in residence because the professor said that they don't want to anger the Chinese government because they want more Chinese students from China. So I was asking myself, who am I? Where am I? If Canada is my home, it's my country, and who can protect me? And of course, since being so many years, I cannot see my parents. I tried to go back to China. I was arrested at the international airport in Beijing, and they sent me back because they didn't want me to, they didn't allow me to enter. And then I was arrested at Hong Kong airport, August 6th of 2008. They won't allow me to enter Hong Kong. And after my first book was published in Hong Kong as a Canadian writer, I was kicked out by the Chinese Writers Association. So I had to be in exile from my writers community. And since I boycotted the Beijing Olympic Games before 2008, I was like being an enemy, public enemy to the whole Chinese community. So I had to be in exile again from the Chinese community in Canada. So when we are talking about exile, we sometimes need to ask ourselves, from where to where? I think many of you may have the similar situation as I experienced. And especially when our Canadian government established the so-called comprehensive strategic relationship, partnership with the Chinese Communist regime, that we got nowhere to exist because our government, our country standing in together with the Chinese Communist tyranny in the same camp. So this is our situation. And of course, I feel so lucky because I came to Canada right after the Tiananmen massacre. I was the one of the most lucky one to escape from the massacre and have been living in Canada. But still, we need to find a way out. And I'm very much looking forward the resilience network to be strong and to be effective and to be the platform for all of us, because many of us, I was here, someone said, we are here, not even not voluntarily. For some people, most people, we don't want to leave our home, our country, and the culture, the history, even the food. But we are the lucky ones, and we need to influence our government in Canada, and to be strong for human rights, and to protect us here. So thank you so much. And I'm really, I feel very fortunate, because I know so many more, they won't have the situation, they won't have the chance. As I receive this kind of a message every day. Hey, Shengxue, can you help me out from China? It's just like in the hill now. I know the feeling. So let we stay in solidarity and try our best, and to especially to give people hope, for those ones who cannot be heard, who cannot be seen, and they need to look at something for them to keep this kind of a warm feeling that their people worry about them, and they try to make a better and a safer world for those people. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sheng. We've got some real fire up here on the panel. I can see that. Bringing the focus to Canada in terms of the Resilience Network and what we can co-create here together. Mostafa, can you tell us what you think the value is of exiled international journalists in Canada? How do you see journalists in exile contributing to both human rights and democratic discourse in this country?
Yeah, sure. This is a very important point, and I had a lot to say, but I will try to be very brief. Actually, to be an exiled journalist, you have to deal with a lot of challenges and difficulties at the same time. You forcibly leave your country, and you have to deal with a new country, with new culture, with new language, with to struggle financially, to find your way to live. And you have to do that when you are in the situation. You need support, you need someone to support you, you need a rest, you need a break, but we don't have you don't have the privilege to take a break. You have to struggle and go on and go on. So yeah, for an exiled journalists, we remain deeply connected to our homelands. We carry an additional moral responsibility to continue documenting events, highlighting political and human rights issues, and amplifying the voices of our people. We say what journalists in our countries cannot say for their safety. Canada, as a multicultural society, should amplify diverse voices. Yet, during my time in Canada, I have noticed a lack of attention, unfortunately, a lack of attention from most of the mainstream press and media outlets to international issues, even in validated regions like the Middle East or historically significant countries like my country, like Egypt. This lack of engagement and attention can be disheartening. Exiled journalists bring valuable perspectives, experience, and stories that can enrich Canada's culture and artistic landscape. We emphasize the values of human rights, democracy, diversity, and solidarity that transcend borders. We bring untold stories from the darkest corners of the world, stories that many in the West have never heard or imagined. We are trying to foster empathy, understanding, and bring sense of global solidarity. And to be honest, this is my next my next research main point: how the prison and exile affect journalists' personal and professional lives, and what are the challenges for the exiled journalists in Canada.
Thank you so much, Mustafa. I'm going to turn the focus to Sadia now, and we'll be talking about what kind of support is, in your view, available in Canada. We're talking about people who are coming from closing or closed civic spaces, who have been through hell already before they even get here, and then they arrive and driving Uber, working at a grocery store. There are far too many of these stories. How can we work together differently so that the opportunities are greater, the platforms are available, and these voices and these stories can be told and action taken to support these communities?
Yeah, it's a really, really good question, Rachel. First of all, I just want to say the definition of resilience right here. If you weren't moved by their stories, I can't imagine anybody wouldn't be. But there are hundreds and hundreds and maybe thousands of people with similar stories, identical stories. In terms of the focus on Canada, everybody who's probably in this space is probably in this room. It's not a big space. And I'm sure you are discovering this. And there are a couple of very, very disturbing trends that I see in terms of the funding landscape, the civic landscape, the freedom of expression landscape, the journalism landscape. We are witnessing some very, very serious pushback to initiatives around inclusion and diversity that are coming north from the U.S. Not that that doesn't exist before; it absolutely did. But we're in a different place now. People are now talking about how to change that language in the U.S. for sure. And in terms of who they fund, how they fund, there's been a huge, huge chilling effect on not-for-profits, charities, and all sorts of other civic society institutions. It's only a matter of time before we are already seeing a couple of examples in Canada. And it's just a matter of time that, that also starts to take hold in a much, much bigger way. And that's where the vigilance, right? I know we can all talk about solidarity, but there are fundamental things worth defending in this country. And your experience around being an insider and an outsider, I think, is also very typical. I think you have within communities hierarchies of those who fight for human rights and justice and those who would not want those stories out there or who do not want to hear their voices either. So the pressures are tremendous in terms of shutting down the kinds of dialogue that we should all be aiming for, the kind of inclusion we should all be aiming for. There is very little in terms of support in Canada, and it breaks my heart to actually say that. And so what can we create together? So here's my pitch, but I suspect very few people in this room are actually in a position to make serious decisions and shift power to allow this to happen. Resilience is a heck of a lot easier to talk about if there's political will. If we get signals that this is now an okay space to be in, if our politicians signal that we are the kind of country that really believes that these are important issues for us to defend, if our civic institutions get that signal, funding is much easier to flow. Instead, what we are seeing is actually a real caution around the kinds of language we will use, the kinds of people we will work with, and God forbid those folks get attacked in the online sphere, which is a huge part of polarization and the shutting down of civic dialogue, then you're into managing that as distraction from the work that actually needs to be done. This is important because the resources are not infinite. And if all your resources are spent defending your very right to speak, this creates all sorts of ripple effects. And I'm hoping that those of us who care about this issue can find other ways to kind of come together, given the political climate we're already in. I hear people talk about what's to come. It's not what's to come. It's already here. I was at an event last week where there was a very prominent example of a Canadian organization, a very small, not-for-profit, that was, that had a complaint launched against it because they were essentially creating a program for racialized youth. And someone complained, and this woman won, who was not a youth and who was not racialized, saying that she had been discriminated against. And therefore, she had lost the ability to take part in this program. Now, those of us who've worked in this space around justice and diversity and inclusion, underrepresented, trying to amplify and support underrepresented communities used to be a completely okay kind of activity protected by our charter. But we are, in this case, this woman won. So what are we to make of this? This organization is no longer running that program. It's had a chilling effect on every single organization in their network. So it concerns me a lot as you're on the cusp of trying to launch. This will require different tools. It will require different ways of working, and it will require the most unlikely allies. And I say that with all respect. We are going to have to be in the room with people who don't think like us, who we may not even like. And this is just being pragmatic. And it's really, really important that we start to kind of behave in that way as well.
It's coming back to that radical and conditional love that the senator spoke about recently. And it's a very strange time. And I agree with you. I sense a real backlash coming. And it's something that we all need to be aware of and vigilant about and working together to support one another through. And on that note, I'm going to bring it home to Chris, who is going to tell us a little bit about what sustainable support for this kind of work actually looks like.
That's a great question. So I think there's support that needs to happen, of course, at an individual level, all of us, in terms of the way in which we engage exiled activists. We as Canada often struggle with people who have arrived in our country, even though we are great beneficiaries of the turmoil in other parts of the world. And we struggle sometimes as individuals. And as individuals, I really do think we need to extend ourselves to help make connections, help with translation of experience from one context to another context, to do all of the things that, Maywan, you have kind of articulated for resilient societies and the network. Additionally, there's something around those alliances, and those problematic partnerships for established organizations. And those, what you refer to as elite organizations, there's something about the work that we need to do to support this kind of work. I think work that your organization is doing, or Odette, your organization is doing. And that's really important as well, to make space, to make resources available to allow this work to be done, to incorporate newcomers with this experience into the work that we do. But that's just a minimum from my perspective. That's kind of like the status quo. That's actually quite conservative in the context of where we should be as a society, as a sector, as a diverse sector. And I think the thing about resilient societies is it's by exiled activists themselves. And that's where the support really needs to go. As opposed to just supporting other organizations or individuals supporting individual exiled activists. Let's be honest, government support is not going to be there in significant amounts for some time. Small initiatives like this take a lot of sweat equity, which is really going into this initiative, a lot of creativity. We as supporters need to help to make connections. We need to advocate on behalf of not just the general cause, but the vehicle here that we have that can take that cause forward. But we also need to help to identify resources. And resources probably that are not going to, again, come from government, at least not in the short term and not in large quantities, but from individuals and from foundations and from other organizations that can make resources available to resilient societies. And so, you know, as interim chair, my responsibility is to help you to do that. And my appeal to all of you and to the connections and networks that you are a part of is to not think about just the cause itself in the abstract, because that is very, very important, but think about the vehicle itself that is being established that can take that cause forward with our active support and sweat equity, but we also need to help to find resources to do that as well.
I'm going to spell it out. Write your checks. And
Write
send them there.
your checks, please.
Very well taken, Chris. Thank you. And I have one final question that I'm just going to start with you, Chris, but it also, anyone on the panel, please jump in. Let's talk about the why of this. Why should we all give a damn about this? Why is this actually fiercely, urgently needed now? Why is this important?
So I think the shrinking of civil space always happens with repression. And we should, of course, be concerned about the individuals directly who are affected by that. But it's like a virus. It's a virus that infects not only individual societies, but it crosses borders. And it's not a virus that is just opportunistic. It's actually quite intentional by the perpetrators of that repression. And that erodes kind of stability within societies, neighbors, regions. Globally, it erodes stability and justice, the pursuit of justice. So like, if we don't actually do the hard work within individual societies, it's going to spread as it is. And so kind of concerted effort, particularly at this time, is important. But I think there's another reason as well. And I think it relates to something, Senator, that you said, and that's around the perfection of our own society. The work that we do in this respect globally and with people who are here from elsewhere is the work that we need to do to perfect our society as a pluralistic, inclusive society that values everyone.
Absolutely. Others on the panel?
Just to bring hope.
I think that we still need to have a common sense and basic information to be spread in our community. For example, that when we are talking about the foreign influence to Canada, that China is the most horrible one, that I experience a lot about that. I think the influence from China is everywhere here in Canada, in our parliament too, and we all know that. And for my own experience, since I was being continually for decades insulting, labeling, and bullying, and also threatening, I reported my situation to our police. And my friend from Amnesty International, because of my language is not good enough, so he came to my home and helped me to make the phone calls. And either police stations and the RCMP and the CCs, and they all didn't know what they can do. They said, you may call RCMP, and we did, and you may call CCs, because this is kind of things that We have no guide. And then they said, oh, you need to call your local police. We called all of them. No one gave an answer what I can do or they should do. And so this kind of situation gives us a question. Why is that? Because we don't even know the basic information about a communist tyranny, what they will do, and also the terrorism influence in Canada as well too. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to offer a very pragmatic resource. The Canadian Association of Journalists actually has a fund around safety, and there are people in this room who are Canadian journalists who have had similar experiences in trying to report all sorts of incidents of harassment and so on to law enforcement with no results. I'm also involved with Women in Journalism, which is very concerned about transnational repression, and they will be the first to tell you that Canada is terrible in terms of its ability to deal with exactly this kind of thing. We just don't seem to have law enforcement that's skilled in this area, or that there's no will, there's no understanding, which leaves many people very, very vulnerable to all sorts of things. But anyways, I want to point you to the fund because it does exist.
Yeah, and Kira Nazish, who runs the Coalition for Women in Journalism, has been very vocal on this point and is doing really good work on raising awareness amongst law enforcement about this problem. Also, Dan Stanton, one of the former directors of CSIS. So there are a few resources that we can connect you to. But mindful of time, we were.
Even they use our law system, because I was sued by killing someone, and they asked for 10,000 Canadian dollars from me. And of course, it's a whole lie. And they sent this legal document to 600 of Canadian politicians and the departments. And still, no one take care of this.
Make sure to connect you to Kieran after this call, after this panel. Okay, mindful of time, and we do need to hear from the Art Lords as well as from JHR's partner in incubation crime, Odette McCarthy from Equitas. So I'm going to wrap it up here. I'm sure people do have questions, but those who do, please come and see the panelists after. There's going to be a reception. Stick around for the reception. And I would be remiss if I did not take a few moments just now to praise the work of Jordan McInnes, who is somewhere in the back in her usual very modest way. Because very much Jordan was the driving energy at Journalists for Human Rights for this excellent initiative, and you see the excellent results already. So thank you, Jordan. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, all of you, for your attention and your care and your unconditional radical love and your comments around strange bedfellows that we're going to have to make, and your extraordinary stories and your thoughtful and strategic support, Chris. And I'm going to pass it back to Amira.
Bravo. Thank you so very much, Rachel, and all the panelists for this incredible conversation. Very humbling. I've never said this before publicly, but Mustafa, as I was listening to you, I kept thinking about my grandfather that I never met because he died when my mother was 5 years old in a prison in Niger. He was a political prisoner. This is particularly important. This event is very, very important. So thank you for all of you for this important panel. I now would like to invite Yama Farad. Yama Farad is the incredible artist and artistic energy behind this incredible art around us. Yama Farad is a muralist, photographer, and the gallery manager of Art Lords, a renowned Afghan art collective that uses creativities for social transformation. Currently based in Canada, Yama's work explores themes of democracy, human rights, and cultural resilience, combining traditional Afghan motifs with modern artistic expression. As a photographer, he captures powerful visuals that tell stories of migration, identity, and hope. Through his role at Art Lords, Yama continues to foster dialogue, empower communities, and advocate for exiled artists and activists. I give you Yama Farad.
Thank you so much for your introducing. Good afternoon, everyone. It's an honor to be here today as a part of the launch of the Renaissance Network. My name is Yama Farhat. Um, I'm a muralist, photographer, and the gala manager of Art Lords, an Afghan art collective dedicated to the social change. Through art, we aim to inspire dialogue and shed light on critical issue affecting our society. Art Lord was born in 2014 during a time of significant challenge in Afghanistan. We use art, particularly public murals, as a way to reclaim civic space, advocate for justice, and give a voice to marginalized communities. Our work became a symbol of hope and a resistance at the time. Kabul was surrounded by concrete walls built by powerful figures for their protection. Soulless wall soulless walls that created a barrier between the people and those in power. We decided to use the exterior of these walls for our protest art. Over time, those concrete walls turned into canvases featuring themes of anti-corruption, civil rights, and the people demand for change. Many years have passed since then, but authors continue to push the same goals and vision. Although all our murals were destroyed after the Taliban came to the power. Our path and struggle have extended beyond borders and continue globally. This exhibit represents our journey and mission. Each painting tells a story, whether it's about struggle of exile, the fight for democracy, or the resilience of communities standing against oppression. This exhibit is particularly relevant to themes of this event. It highlights the shrinking civic space and the threats faced by human rights defenders and civil society activists. It serves as a visual reminder of the importance of supporting this voice, especially as they navigate the challenge of exile. Art Lords itself, an example of resilience after being forced into exile. We had to recognize and rebuild in a new context. This was not an easy process. It required us to adapt while staying true to our mission of amplifying unheard voices and advocating for justice. Through this journey, we have learned that art is not just a medium for expression. It's a powerful tool for connection and advocacy. It breeds culture, divides, spark conversation, and keeps the spirits of resistance alive, even in the face of displacement. In closing, I would like to thank the resilience network for creating a platform that connects and supports those who fight for justice and democracy. Initiatives like this are critical of fostering hope and unity in challenge time. Thank you so much, and I apologize for some of words and pronouncing. Thank you so much for everything.
That was excellent English. It's now time to introduce Odette McCarthy. She promotes human rights and gender equality in all projects and she undertakes. As the executive director of Equitas since 2020, Odette accumulates nearly 30 years of experience in the international cooperation sector for a range of organizations. She has served on the boards of several non-for-profit organizations, including Cooperation Canada. She is an active member of the Feminist Working Group on Foreign Policy and of the Anti-Racism Advisory Committee for Canada's international cooperation sector. She was a member of Canada's Indo-Pacific Advisory Committee in 2022. In February 2024, Odette received the Karen Tax Award. This award is bestowed by Cooperation Canada to an individual who, through collaboration, considerably improved the lives of women in the world and promoted equality between men and women. I give you Odette McCarthy.
So as I stand here to provide some closing remarks, I have to say that I am filled with immense gratitude because I am very moved. I'm very moved after hearing all of you speak today with incredible generosity. And I'm very moved in very much the same way that I was, Maywan, when we first spoke. And it's all very well to be moved, but it's important that we then act when we're moved. And that's certainly how I feel yet again today, is moved to take action where I can and how I can. This initiative, the Resilience Network, is not just a program. It's a vision born from necessity, courage, and very unwavering belief in the power of human rights defenders to shape a better world. I personally believe very deeply in this vision. At Equitas, we have the profound privilege of seeing firsthand the bravery that we've heard today, brilliance that we've also heard today, and the relentless dedication of human rights defenders in Canada and across the world. These unsung heroes and heroines risk everything, often safety and lives, to fight for freedom, democracy, and justice, not just for themselves, but actually for all of us. Yet despite these sacrifices, many face persecution, exile, and barriers that make their vital work even more challenging. Through human rights education, we have seen how knowledge and skills empower individuals to navigate these barriers and advocate for their communities and create lasting change. And that's why at Equitas, we're resoundingly committed to the next steps needed to build the Resilience Network. Transnational repression is not an abstract concept. It's actually an escalating reality. We see it here in Canada, and we're seeing it across the globe. And yet, in the face of these immense challenges, I believe, and we believe at Equitas, that in the Resilience Network. Why? Because I've seen the transformative potential of human rights defenders, the concrete transformative work that's done. You're not just survivors, you're actually change makers. And with the right support and the potential to drive that positive social change in communities where you now live, and where I hope that you feel that you've become part of us, it's limitless, the potential for change. So the vision is not just about you, It's actually about all of us. The rise of polarization, of authoritarianism, of that shrinking civil space that we heard about today is a threat to all of us. It's not just a threat to the front lines. And here in Canada, where human rights are a cornerstone of our identity, and where we'll host the G7 next year, we have a responsibility to do more. So human rights are not just a value that we uphold, but they're actually something that calls us to act. The United Nations Pact for the Future that was adopted in this past September reinforces this. Article 10 of the Pact highlights the necessity of safeguarding civic space and protecting the rights of individuals and groups working towards peace, justice, and sustainable development. This includes exiled human rights defenders who play a critical role in advancing these goals despite working in really precarious circumstances. And by supporting them, which is what we're calling us all to do today, we're actually making small steps to fulfill that commitment and to uphold human rights. The Resilience Network, as imagined by Maywant and the team, and all of us that are now extending our support in the way that we can, is filled with promise. It's seeking to harness an untapped potential of exiled human rights defenders to enrich Canada's institutions, our communities, our very democracy here in Canada, and in communities worldwide. It's global in scope, but its heart actually begins here, actually with all of us in this room today. We've heard incredible stories of courage, resilience, and hope, and these stories remind us that we all have a role to play. Supporting this vision doesn't always require grand gestures. It begins with listening. So truly hearing the stories of our neighbors, our colleagues, our friends who are living exile. So that's a first step we can all take, is to listen every day where we can. This in and of itself is an action and one we can all take. In addition, there are other small steps that we can take. I'm a strong believer of small steps in action. It allows us to continue to dream big, but to work towards those. So there's opportunities to partner with resilient networks, to reach out to Maywand and offer that opportunity, be it your organization, your institution, your business, to partner, to fund the cohort of placements. So as individuals, we can all make a donation, small or the size that makes sense for us. So I ask you also to reach out to Maywand or those of us at Equitas or Journalists for Human Rights that could support, to facilitate connections to the potential hosts or institutions that will actually host those human rights defenders. So all of us know businesses, organizations, folks that are running community organizations where human rights defenders could actually play a role. So as we move forward, think about those connections and amplify the stories that you've heard today. So I know many of us are on social media, a little bit or a lot. We all talk around the dinner table from time to time. We speak with friends and go out for coffee. Talk about the Resilience Network. Share the stories out. Share how you were moved. Share what touched you. That's actually very powerful to make those connections. I personally am inspired to act, as I have been since my first interactions with Maywand. And I hope you are too. Together, we can ensure that Resilience Network not only takes off, but becomes actually a global phenomenon. So this is where the dreaming starts to kick in after the small steps, right? So let's stand with these extraordinary individuals and show that Canada is not just a haven, but actually a champion. So let's think about the transformation we can see in Canada, where we actually are this champion for human rights, justice, and democracy in the world. And maybe the virus then actually mutates and becomes something that something positive in the world. So thank you all for being with us this evening. A very warm and great an extension of gratitude for your attention today and your listening. And let's make our presence count this evening. So thank you, Maywand.
Thank you, Odette, for the call to action. I now would like to invite Nurjahin to the podium for a few more words.
if you allow me, I just want to say that an event like this could not be put together without the support of a lot of people. But a lot of people have been recognized, but I do want to take the opportunity to recognize the team at Massey College, who have just stepped up, and they were with us throughout. And as Alyssa is here, the team, and then Joe and Sarah, the whole, I don't know who I'm still missing. Alyssa, your team here, there, I think you need a really good hand. I want to recognize also Mahadessa. She's been part of the team, and several of you who I see here in the room, Kim and Sandra and Marianne, right from the beginning, you sat with us when My One came, and you encouraged us, and you said this can be done and we should do it at Massey. So for that, thank you all so very much. Thank you all. I just don't want to leave this. And Haris, you too. Thank you. I don't think I heard your name, but thank you. That.
Thank you so kindly. We've heard all day today. We've come to the end of our program. We've heard all day about the importance of solidarity, of radical love in the face of the pushback that we're experiencing against democracy and the ongoing polarization. And so as we think about how to build partnerships with each other to support the network, the call to action, of course, is that we hope you sign up to be a host institution, that you contribute, and that you are part of this important network that contributes and will contribute to building a better Canada. Thank you so much for being here. Please stay with us for a networking moment around a moment of relaxation. Thank you so much.